If they take what we built with our dead, then we will teach them why we built it. Elena Vasquez read the 13 names etched into the bronze rail of the transport as it descended toward Nexus Prime. The rail was a memorial to the ship's first crew, lost on a relief convoy during the terraform famine. Her fingertips paused on the years. The metal was warm, touched by 1,000 hands who believed remembrance was armor. Inside the Galactic Council, ceilings soared like vaults carved for giants. Colors and biologies and histories moved around her in a tide. She had learned to walk through it as through weather, head high, eyes careful. The human table was still near the back, smaller than the others, an architectural reminder that junior member meant junior voice. Elena smiled anyway. She had brought something with her that no architect could model, a plan stitched together from patience and grief. Ambassador Vasquez, rumbled Admiral Cathar of the Zephyrian hegemony, 8 feet of burnished muscle and ritual scars. Sector 7 requires adjustment. 17 human worlds will be transferred for efficient stewardship. A few delegates hummed in sympathy the way one hums for a difficult child. A crystalline ambassador spoke in rainbows. The settlements are immature. Relocation is humane. The machine collective rendered the word humane as a checksum, false but well-formed. Elena stood. Those immature places hold 40 million citizens. Names, burials, schools where children learn the songs of 2 skies. There was laughter, clicks, whistles, static bursts, polite like a classroom correcting a mistake. Cathar's red eyes softened. Young species mistake attachment for strategy. Elena thought of a different classroom, a dockyard under the Atlantic, where welders cut plates without registry numbers and grandmothers ladled stew at midnight shifts. We can discuss alternatives, she said, that do not begin by erasing graves. 30 standard days, the Chancellor intoned. We reconvene for Earth's answer. That night, Elena walked alone beneath neon constellations of the Council Quarter. She ordered broth from an aquatic kiosk and watched the steam draw ghosts in the air. Her wristband pulsed. She opened a diplomatic channel and dictated a 4-word message. To the wrong ears it would sound banal. To the right hands, it would unlock safes that had been double-locked since the orbital evacuations. Package delivery required. On New Carthage, a baker turned off the morning lights, bolted the cafe door, and pulled a canvas tarp from a wall to reveal a console that should not exist. On Pieta Station, an archivist stopped sorting death notices and keyed a sequence she had practiced only in dreams. On Luna, deep under the museums and tour routes and the schoolchildren's glass, a woman none of the agencies had profiled set a ceramic mug on a steel table and said, "Status, Phase 1 assets waking," reported Colonel Kim Martinez. Ghost yards reading green, communications grid entangled and dark. Sarah Chen, mid-level quartermaster if you believe the public lists, tapped the side of her mug and watched the galaxy paint itself in light. Blue for home. Red for threat, green for what they had hidden inside the scaffolding of daily life. Elena, meanwhile, kept doing the work of a polite species. She toured a museum of extinct whales curated by the Aquatic Alliance and asked sincere questions. She traded recipes with an insectoid matron for a honey that changed flavors with temperature. She allowed herself to be underestimated so thoroughly that underestimation became a weapon she could unholster with a smile. At a private reception aboard the Hegemony flagship, Cathar leaned near. "Protection," he said, gesturing at the star map. "In exchange for those 17 worlds, Guidance for your admirable but chaotic energy. Guidance, Alina echoed and remembered the bronze rail, the ship that had not come back. Guidance, in the old sailor's sense, meant knowing which stars were fixed and which were merely bright. I'll take your offer home. Do, he said, magnanimous. The galaxy is not kind to children who run with scissors. When Alina returned to her quarters, she removed her shoes and sat cross-legged on the floor, as her mother had when bills didn't balance and the lights still had to stay on. She opened a second channel, deeper than diplomacy, and spoke softly to the quiet network threaded through cargo invoices and wedding registries and scholarship forms. Begin memorial protocols, she said, because this was what they called the thing no alien intelligence had ever named correctly. Not a phantom fleet, not a black budget, not a conspiracy. It was a memorial in the old civic sense, a promise that the dead would change the living. The message moved the way good news and bad news always move, through people who had reasons to listen. On New Geneva, Jacob Mueller finished turning soil for the winter wheat, wiped his hands on his trousers and pressed his palm to a panel in a barn wall. It recognized tendons and temperature and a faint scar from a kitchen knife, then slid aside. Cold air spilled from a room that had no right to exist on a farm. Racks of inert drones, sealed crates labeled as seed but weighted like tungsten, a folded FL. He was not special. That was the point. The memorial did not depend on heroes. It depended on neighbors. In the steelworks of New Birmingham, Maria Santos shut down the line that stamped plowshares and opened the one that stamped armor segments whose curvature matched a hull pattern missing from every registry. Switch to wartime production, she said. The paperwork would call it a maintenance audit. The auditors would find their favorite pastries waiting and nothing else. In classrooms, teachers rolled down maps and taught geography that included evacuation corridors. In clinics, nurses inventoried burn gel and nerve stabilizers, with the calm of people who had practiced not panicking. A street violinist in Cydonia played Blackbird for tips while passing a packet to a courier bound for a shipyard under an ice shelf in the south. The packet contained tuning instructions for engines that lied convincingly to sensors. Under Luna, Admiral Sarah Chen, finally using the name the job required, walked the command gallery. She traced with one finger the seam where one panel had been cut, then welded invisible because quality mattered. Communications. Entanglement lattice holding at 5/9, said Akafer. Latency under 1/10 of a human blink across inner colonies. Outer relays warming. Ghost fleet. Alpha in the debris cones of the Perseid sweep. Beta tucked into asteroid belts labeled non-economical. Gamma beneath the glare of a red dwarf no one visits because the photographs don't sell posters. Delta reading the ecliptic behind New Hades. Beautiful, Sarah murmured, and meant the unromantic kind of beauty. A system doing what it was built to do. Doctrine briefings varied by audience. To the former freighter captains now wearing gray with no insignia, she spoke of timing. You will look like a mistake until you don't. To the civic volunteers manning decoy evac accounts, she spoke of ethics. Every lie we tell today must prevent a harder truth tomorrow. To the scholars hired on paper to study alien music, she spoke of translation. The council speaks in metaphors of age and stone. We will answer in metaphors of covenant. Alina's days filled with handshakes and fixed smiles. Information lived in the way A Zephyrian general gestured toward a formation while pretending to talk about cuisine. It lived in the pause before a crystalline's light pattern shifted. It lived in which machine voted abstain when abstaining required courage. She wrote her notes as if she were recording recipes for a family she might never meet. A pinch of this ally, a dash of that concession, bake at the temperature of humiliation until it crusts into. At night, she walked the workers' quarter, where cooks flamed peppers hot enough to make humans sneeze and pilots traded folk wisdom about vacuum superstition. A vexed child asked if her hair was a kind of antenna. Elena bent down. Only for certain frequencies, she said, mostly for home. Home, where the memorial lived not just as hardware but as curriculum. The history classes did not end at disaster. They tracked forward into repair. Students studied the Warsaw Airlift and the Berlin Blockade, the Freedom Rides and the Belfast Good Friday, the Marshall Plan and the Meiji Restoration, times when power was used to lift, bind, mend. The lesson plan was simple and subversive. The strongest victories were not against enemies but against habits. On the 18th day, Admiral Cathar invited Elena to a private training deck aboard Hegemony's Fist. He showed her trophies, a lance taken on Keelthuren, a banner from a pirate king who'd learned the difference between theater and war too late. "We could give you peace," he said, not unkindly, "in exchange for obedience. Elbow room bought by someone else's eviction is not peace," Elena said. "It is moving the noise." "Noise?" He looked amused. "History," she answered. "It's loud until someone listens." He laughed, and for a brief moment she liked him, not for his empire but for his honesty about it. That honesty would make what came next survivable. Empires founded on pretending never survived confrontation with facts. Empires that could admit what they were could learn. Sometimes they even chose to. Day 30 arrived like a court date. The council chamber hummed. The word on every feed was inevitable. Elena carried a datapad that could have held surrender terms. It held something heavier, the names from the bronze rail copied by hand. "The government of Earth has considered," she said, voice steady. "Our answer is no." It was not drama. It was a threshold. Behind her in the air, invisible entanglement threads plucked like harp strings as relays took the single word she had already sent and braided it into 1,000 tasks. Approved. New Hades wore a blue-white ring like a wedding band, thin and precious. 6 human patrol boats orbited within it, neither advancing nor retreating, as the Zephyrian armada fell into textbook formation. A metal constellation aligned for photograph history would use to teach hubris or inevitability depending on the author. "Human vessels," came Cathar's baritone across open space. "Stand down and prepare for boarding. Resistance is uneconomical." "Admiral," answered a voice that kept its smile out of the audio but not out of the words. "Elena Rodriguez here, New Hades Defense. You have a beautiful flagship. Our cadets are arguing about whether its heat sinks are a single coil or a braided array. Loser buys empanadas." On Hegemony's Fist, a communications officer looked at the admiral as if to ask whether jokes were a new weapon category. "Psychological feint," he supplied, though his tone turned the period into a question. The 6 boats began to move. Not panic vectors but arcs like calligraphy, effortless, disrespectful to mass. Hull plates parted, quiet compartments yawned open. Spines telescoped, ribs extended, armor unfolded from beneath civilian paint like truth under polite conversation. In seconds, 6 boats had become 6 cruisers whose signatures had not existed in any catalog that mattered. Sensor error, said Techno. The error held steady. More errors arrived. Mining stations coughed off dust covers to reveal turrets disguised as ore sorters. Cargo pods blossomed into fighters. Stealth fields bloomed and died like morning glories, hundreds of them leaving behind ships with no birth certificates and excellent aim. The first volley did not target throats. It targeted wrists, propulsion, shields, fire control. The human fire plan had been written by teachers who graded cooperation generously, and by nurses who knew where to place a tourniquet so a limb would be there tomorrow. Zephyrian ships shuddered as systems went dark, not all at once, but in sequences that made damage control an unsolvable puzzle. Fix one failure, inherit 3 others designed to blossom when touched. Communication analysis, barked Cathar. How do they coordinate at this density? Entanglement signatures across the battle space. Came the answer that should have been impossible. Latency negligible. Cathar understood doctrine. He had written doctrine. Doctrine assumed gaps between order and execution, censor and decision, hit and remedy. The humans had removed the gaps. Their formation breathed like a chest. You could not surprise a chest by removing air it had already reclaimed. Admiral, Rodriguez again, voice gentled by professional courtesy, we are trying to keep casualties low. Stand down and we will tractor you safe. Zephyrians do not surrender, he growled, and meant that he, at least, did not surrender the meaning of words lightly. Then let me make an argument, she said. You brought 500 ships to humble 6. We brought 6 to educate 500. Which of us better understood what class we were in? Targeting alarms sang aboard Hegemony's fist. A beam stitched 3 decks with blue, then stopped as if ashamed of killing. Systems died, not crew. The choice was arithmetic and moral. Arithmetic. Captured ships teach more than destroyed ones. Moral. The memorial had been built for the living. It wasted nothing the dead could not forgive. Out in the ring light, a human destroyer took a lucky hit and shed plating like autumn bark. For a breath the choreography wobbled. 2 companion ships stepped sideways. Physics be damned, threw shields like umbrellas and towed their wounded between them. Engines braided briefly through a field only quantum could explain. On the lunar display wall, Sarah Chen exhaled. That's your mistake, she said softly to the image of the Zephyrian formation. You think formations are geometry. Ours are grammar. He understood something then, the Admiral, in the way soldiers understand each other across languages. This was not cruelty masquerading as mercy. This was craft. It was insult only if you believed there was honor in wasting lives you could afford not to waste. 1 hour in, nearly 200 Zephyrian hulls drifted, lights dim, crews alive and breathing hard. Human losses were non-zero because honest arithmetic demands a price column, but they were not the column anyone had predicted. Terms, he said at last, the word sanding his throat as it left. Full honors, answered a new voice, older, quieter. Medical for your wounded, safe conveyance home for any who wish it, your ships impounded, not scrapped. The 17 worlds remain ours. Name yourself, he asked, because names conduct power in any culture worth the effort of children. Admiral Sarah Chen, human defense. Silence stretched, a respectful ribbon, then cut itself clean. All Zephyrian vessels, Cathar said on fleet-wide, stand down. He watched the ring-light glint off hulls that had moved like calligraphy and felt a professional emotion he had not felt in years, the urge to take notes. Before he closed the channel, Rodriguez returned. "For what it's worth," she said, "your flanking maneuver at Keelthuren was the right call. We stole the manual. We needed you to keep believing it worked." He laughed once, which startled even him. "Next time," he said, "write your own manual." "We did," she replied, gentle again. "It starts with names." 18 hours after New Hades, the council convened in a room that had never sounded so much like a classroom in need of new curriculum. Alina's table was no longer in the back. Someone had moved it while no one was admitting to moving anything. "The reports indicate," the Chancellor began, "that 6 patrol craft became cruisers," Alina said, "and we're not alone." She did not gloat. Gloating is a poor building material. "Before we debate punishments for espionage you always suspected but preferred not to prove, may I introduce the person you should have been speaking with for years?" Admiral Sarah Chen appeared without flourish. "For half a century," Chen said, "we practiced a narrow art, to look like we could not do harm long enough to earn the chance to do good. We stole and bartered ideas, yes. We improved them where we could, but we also studied civics. When do strong states protect the weak without condescension? When does deterrence become provocation? Where do laws end and norms begin? Light spilled in maps, bases that were farms, shipyards that were museums, sensor webs that looked like weather sats. Delegates shouted, crystals strobed, machines warbled. You violate sovereignty, someone accused. We preserved our own, Alina answered. You cannot require us to be clients and then indict us for failing to act like patrons. The room recalibrated around that sentence, a proof more than a threat. Chen continued. She did not list every weakness she could exploit. She named enough to make the point that she had done the homework and then put the pencil down. We do not want your subjugation, she said. We want institutional guarantees that make subjugation less likely for anyone. Guarantees, the aquatic delegate repeated, as if tasting a new spice. Alina lifted a 12-page document. The Galactic Cooperation Framework. Equal voice for any polity that can reach the stars and keep people fed when it gets there. Mediation first, verification next, defense last. Voluntary tech sharing that avoids dependency and decadence. Mutual defense against conquest, including if the aggressor is us. You ask us to trust you, said the insectoid representative, while you admit you plan to fight us if asked. Trust the structure, Alina said. Help build something you can use against us if we ever become what you fear. We prepared for war to choose peace. Peace is a decision. Decisions need capacity. Cathar's hologram flickered into being. He looked older because someone had finally given him the gift of a mirror. Terms of surrender were honored, he said to the room, preempting those who would paint their enemy as treacherous to save face. Our crews live. Our ships remain intact. We were taught. The last word contained more dignity than some victories. A pause lived where pride would have died. Then the Chancellor asked the only adult question left. What does humanity want? Alina thought of the bronze rail, of Jacob's hidden room, of Maria's repurposed press, of a schoolkid on Cydonia who believed hair was an antenna to home. We want a galaxy where strength is boring enough to be background, she said. Where children inherit institutions instead of grudges, where explorers explore instead of clean up after invasion. We have written a syllabus. We invite you to co-teach. Votes are usually procedural. This one felt like a vow. Lights rose one by one, not from sudden virtue but because the alternative was a century they could already describe. Unanimous, the Chancellor announced, voice smaller than the moment and rightly so. After, Cathar found Alina in a corridor of hanging gardens. He stood close enough for honesty. "I treated you like a child," he said. "I allowed it," she replied. "It made rooms we needed. Will you show my officers the maneuver that stitched my right flank to your mercy?" She smiled. "We'll show them plowshares that remember how to become shields and back again." That night, Alina walked through a plaza where human children chased luminous insects while crystalline toddlers refracted them into rainbows. She thought of the line Americans teach their kids in civics, of a more perfect union, and felt the old ache that more implies work. The memorial was working, not only ships and threads but curriculum, strength yoked to restraint, memory to policy, grief to design. In the room beneath Luna, Sarah Chen signed the release authorizing defensive technologies to be shared with new signatories. "Only what keeps people breathing," she told Akafer. "Nothing that shortens arguments." He nodded. They were not saints, they were stewards. On Nexus Prime, Alina closed her day with a message to her mother's old classroom. "We didn't win a war today," she said to the children through the camera. "We won the chance to study together without someone flipping the table. Do your homework. Learn the names. That's how you hold power without holding it wrong." She slept at last, thinking of rails warmed by hands that keep promises. Power that cannot be looked at will eventually look away from its purpose. 3 weeks after the vote, Nexus Prime received a small procession that looked nothing like a fleet. 3 corvettes without ornament, a shuttle painted a neutral gray, and a set of inspectors who did not match. The crystalline auditor refracted the concourse lights in anxious ripples. The machine collective's liaison wore a body shaped for conference tables and firm handshakes. The Zephyrian colonel arrived in a uniform that did not hide his scars, which was its own form of apology. Alina met them with tea, which was its own kind of treaty. "This is not a search," she said in the briefing room beneath a mural of the first orbital farm. "It's a class. We'll show you what we're willing to show. You'll tell us what you need to trust. Somewhere between those two, we'll write a habit." Admiral Chen stood to the side, civilian jacket over a uniform without medals. "We will not expose everything," she said plainly. "A lockbox remains, a doctrine we borrowed from constitutional democracies. Some tools sealed, time-limited, audit-logged, released by multiple keys. We learned from our own worst days that secrecy multiplies until it owns you. We intend to keep our secrets on a leash, not the other way around." The machine liaison hummed. "Define leash." "Public law, independent courts, civilian oversight, and a schedule," Chen said, sliding a tablet forward. "Every 5 years, a tranche declassifies unless 3 branches agree to delay. You can attend the ceremony. We will be embarrassed together." The crystalline auditor brightened literally. "Embarrassment is a sign of life," she said. They toured Luna's command gallery, this time with the lights on. The inspectors walked past consoles labeled in 3 alphabets, past an art wall where crew families had pinned photographs of gardens and ugly first birthday cakes. Chen stopped at a panel with a thin seam. "Here we decide what not to do," she said. "It's a negative capability room. Every operation sits next to a list of reasons not to run it. Every reason has a teacher's name attached and a student who challenged it." The Zephyrian colonel ran thick fingers along the seam. "A room for restraint," he said softly. "We could have used one." Outside the glass, workers unbolted covers from antennas and replaced them with weather stations. A memo went out to shipyards. Convert Bay 7 from stealth plating to rescue capsules. Maria Santos cried privately when she signed the retooling order, then took her team for coffee, and explained that good industry must learn to retire itself when better duties arrive. Not everyone liked the audits. On Cydonia, a small crowd held signs that read "Don't teach the wolf our door," and we built this to survive, not to share. Elena asked for a public hall and stood on a wooden riser that creaked just loud enough to keep a speaker honest. "We are not handing over a key," she said. "We're agreeing to a peephole with a chain. Audits make tyrants hesitate. They also make friends brave." A hand rose, a woman in mechanics overalls. "What if they use what they see against us?" "They already tried," Elena said gently. "The difference now is that we decide what is visible, and we invite them to show us back. Mutual vulnerability is how you retire fear without retiring vigilance." The first audit nearly failed over a missing freighter. The inspectors asked about a cargo ship that had left New Carthage with steel coils and arrived with none. The ledger clashed with the satellite record. It smelled like a lie. Chen brought up the raw logs. The ship had jettisoned its coils to rescue a spinner whose magnetic coupling failed. The captain hadn't filed the emergency amendment because he'd spent the night in sickbay with a broken collarbone and a crying baby. The baby slept on screen, open mouth, ridiculous. The machine liaison wrote a new rule on his tablet. Emergency declarations can be filed by medical officer. Shipping penalties waived if rescue verified. "We prefer systems that assume fallible heroes," he said. They visited a classroom where 10-year-olds were practicing debates. The resolution on the chalkboard: should temporal weapons be outlawed forever or slowed by design? A boy argued for outlawed forever, citing history and human weakness. A girl argued for slowed by design. Outlawed weapons don't disappear. Slowed weapons give adults time to change their minds. The Zephyrian colonel wiped his eyes discreetly and later asked for a copy of the curriculum. "We will teach this at the academy," he said. "Our cadets know how to run fast. They must learn when to tie their own laces together." On the audit's final day, the inspectors stood with Chen on a balcony over the lunar city, where glass geodes caught sunlight and threw it onto sidewalks as hexes of gold. "We expected a maze," the crystalline auditor said. "We found a workshop." "Workshops can make anything," Cathar's colonel warned. "Yes," Chen said, "which is why they also make rules." They signed a verification protocol, surprise visits within limits, data escrow for strategic systems, a hotline answered by humans and machines who could say stop and be obeyed. The machine liaison left a note in the log: "Trust begins when the first no is honored." That night, Elena sent her mother's old class another message. "Power needs daylight," she told the kids. "Not too much or it cracks, enough that the plants under it grow toward something other than fear. A promise isn't real until it's expensive." The distress came from a dim wedge of sky where cartographers wrote cautions in footnotes. The Korai had arrived last year, a small, beautiful people who sailed into faster than light like a choir stumbling into harmony. Their first station looked like a wind chime. Their first law was simple: share tea before negotiation. A non-signatory warlord, an old empire with new debts, decided the Korai's refinery would make a fine down payment. The framework's mutual defense clause activated with the indifference of a fire alarm. No one asked whether the Korai could pay. Elena chaired the contact room. "Coalition command," she said. "No unilateral heroics." The point is not a human victory. The point is a Korai tomorrow. Cathar arrived as an ally, not a foil. He accepted a wing under Chen without ritual objection. I learned faster this way, he said. Later he admitted to Alina on a quiet channel that younger Zephyrian officers had lobbied him for the slot. They want to fly in a grammar instead of a geometry. Coalition briefings were a study in translation. The aquatic flotilla emphasized currents and drag. The crystalline ships talked in resonant chords. The machine task force drew decision trees like woven baskets. Humans provided corridors. Evac lanes here, rescue bubbles here, decoy signatures here. Chen pressed a finger to a map. Our rule, do not destroy what surrender would preserve. And if you must destroy, destroy the appetite, not the kitchen. The warlord's fleet arrived heavy and loud, broadcasting the old music of inevitability. Coalition ships answered with a quieter song. A Korai elder sang literally over the loop, lyrics about weather and debts forgiven after harvest. It did nothing to shields and everything to the room. The fight was not fair and was not designed to be. Fairness is for courts. This was about ending harm with the least additional harm. Human rescue trawlers threaded through debris with nets of magnetic lace. Zephyrian cruisers took the front to absorb the first anger. Cathar's wing held fast, and when two hulls flashed and spun, human tugs slid under them like friends arriving with a truck on moving day. Machine liaisons jammed the warlord's command algorithms with "give up" loops written in a syntax copied from ancient human protest chants. The warlord's flagship tried a feint toward civilian housing. Coalition doctrine allowed pursuit but required warnings in 3 languages and a 4th. The universal grammar of turning your own broadside away at the last second to show that you could have cut and didn't. On the 3rd warning, the flagship fired anyway. Chen's voice came across the channel without heat. Disable. Bridge intact. The shot that followed was old-fashioned, kinetic, almost modest and terribly modern in its precision. The flagship went dark. The Korai elder stopped singing and cried. Alina took the surrender in a room that smelled like unfamiliar tea. The warlord's second-in-command said what cornered people have always said. We can pay, we will pay, spare us and we will be useful. You will be useful either way, Alina said. But usefulness is not the measure, understanding is. She outlined reparations in labor and knowledge. The warlord's yards would produce rescue capsules for 5 years. Their academies would teach the Korai's engineering. Their officers would attend a course on the laws of war taught by a machine, a Zephyrian, and a Korai elder. You will pass the class before you pass the corridor out of this system, she finished. Chen visited the Korai wind chime station at dawn. Children braided her sleeve tassels, gift custom, and asked how to become rescuers who race faster than bullies. She told them about paramedics, about volunteers in hurricanes, about the long American argument called just war and the longer one called civil rights. When to stand, when to kneel, how to keep your hands open even when they shake. Cathar stopped beside her at the viewport. Your restraint during the feint, he said, prevented a slaughter and cost you nothing. It cost us nerve, she said, but nerve grows back when you use it. Coalition ships departed without banners. The Korai sent each captain home with a cup that made ordinary water taste like the day after grief. On the ride back to Nexus Prime, Alina wrote a memo titled Victory Without Ownership. She included guidelines for ceremonies. No flyovers, no parades, lots of paperwork done carefully and signed in ink. The clause had been expensive. That was how you knew it was real. The hardest part of keeping your word is when your word keeps you from winning faster. It came, as temptations do, at midnight with excellent reasons. A human analyst, brilliant, exhausted, adored by her team, brought Chen a plan titled Deterrence Through Temporal Demonstration. A neighboring power had begun staging accidental incursions along trade routes, testing framework patience. The plan proposed to age a single unmanned ship a century in 10 seconds, broadcast the footage, and end the game without blood. The device harms no one, the analyst said. It's theater. We control conditions. Chen stared at the animation. It was graceful and obscene. And when the theater works, she asked, they stay home. And when it doesn't, we have other plays. That, Chen said, is the problem. The framework required signatories to notify the Council of any use of banned or borderline technologies. Alina read the memo and scheduled a session in a plain room with harsh lights. She asked the analyst to present. She asked a machine ethicist to respond with probabilities. She invited a crystalline jurist who collected human trial transcripts for pleasure. She asked Cathar to sit in the back, because honesty with friends is better than comfort with strangers. The analyst argued well. She invoked lives not yet wasted, plants not yet burned, children not yet orphaned. We would save them all, she said, voice thin with hope and fear. A ghost of a weapon instead of the weapon. The machine ethicist placed a small wooden box on the table, handmade by a human carpenter on New Birmingham. He opened it and removed a card with a sentence. If a device changes what people believe about time, IT changes what they believe about promises. Contracts rely on tomorrow looking like today in the ways that matter. He said, age ships and you age trust. The crystalline jurist quoted a human case from centuries earlier, where a court refused to allow a perfect search because the method insulted the dignity of being presumed innocent. Your plan presumes guilt in everyone who watches, she said. That presumption will travel. Alina spoke last. We built a memorial to remember that not everything we can do should be done just because it will work, she said. We wrote the framework so that future us will not need to be as clever as past us to remain good. Chen declined authorization. She sent the analyst home with 3 days of mandatory sleep and a handwritten note about how zeal is a virtue tilted by gravity. The analyst cried in an elevator and then slept for 32 hours. When she woke, she wrote a paper titled Speed, Dignity, and the Cost of Waiting. It became the cornerstone of a doctrine future officers would bless when tempted. The neighboring power continued its accidents for another tense month. Then a freighter captain, Korai, brave in the worn way of people who have been helped and wish to repay, broadcast live from his bridge as he threaded a corridor the coalition had published. We are in the open, he said, eyes on us. The incursion ceased, not because fear had been planted, but because witnesses had. The lesson traveled farther than any beam. Alina recorded a message for the kids again. Sometimes the right answer is slower, she said. Sometimes slower is smarter because it leaves the world unbroken enough to keep learning. In history class, you will read about leaders who solved problems quickly and left worse ones. Please also read about leaders who made boredom possible. Boredom is what peace feels like when you're 10. Cathar read the analyst's paper in his quarters and sent her a note. We have a word for restraint that translates as sheath that remembers the shape of the blade. Your doctrine fits IT. He added a postscript. Next time you are tempted, write to me. We can be boring together. We keep the future by teaching it how we kept the past. The memorial had always been a fleet of ships and a stack of rules and a habit of saying no to yourself before you say no to anyone else. Now it became a holiday, across human space, and in outposts where humans were guests. The day began with rails. Not parades, not jets cutting signatures into blue, but rails warmed by hands. Children traced names. Teachers explained why names are better than numbers at carrying love across time. A new plaque on Luna listed the ships disabled at New Hades with the same font as the human dead, because humility does not subtract. It adds categories worth honoring. At New Birmingham, Maria Santos led her crew through Bay 7, now bright with rescue capsules. She paused under a girder and told an apprentice how her grandmother had once worked a line that made helmets for miners, and how that, too, had been a kind of rescue. Industries should learn new nouns, she said, and the apprentice wrote it on his locker. In Nexus Prime Central Park, Alina swore her oath as the first Galactic Cooperation Commissioner. She placed her palm on a book bound in a material every species had contributed: cloth, crystal, synthesized bark, machine memory foam that made the page feel like it remembered you. I will defend the powerless by making the powerful predictable, she promised, then added a sentence that was not in the script. I will defend the powerful by educating them into usefulness. Admiral Chen spoke to a hall full of cadets from 12 species. Her uniform still bore no medals. You will be praised for what you can break, she said. It is better to be praised for what you can repair. The trick is to design the battle so that repair is the expected outcome. She announced the release of defensive technologies, better fire suppression, hull foam that grew around breaches like coral, a beacon protocol that funneled civilians away from harm by making safety feel like gravity. She kept the temporal fields locked, and the room applauded because they were old enough to know that not everything you clap for should be exciting. Cathar addressed his academy the same day. He told a story about a right flank stitched to an enemy's mercy, and a laugh he hadn't expected to survive in his own mouth. He sent his best teachers to the Frameworks Joint College, which would teach officers 3 subjects: logistics, languages, and how to lose a vote with grace. The Korai brewed tea that tasted like a morning remembered correctly. They dedicated a wind chime to the coalition, thin rods tuned to the frequency of shared relief. When stirred by station air, it sang the motif that had become the framework's unofficial anthem, a few notes that sounded like a door opening wider than you thought your house could hold. In a school on Earth, a girl asked Alina during a visit why the framework had only 12 pages. Because long documents hide bad surprises, Alina said. Short ones force us to look each other in the face and admit what we mean. The girl nodded solemnly and asked for a copy. Alina handed her one and pointed to the margins. Leave room to write what you learn. That evening, the Framework's verification office published its first embarrassment. A human patrol captain had cut a corner on a convoy schedule to make a cousin's wedding and got caught by an aquatic inspector with a stopwatch and a sense of humor. The captain paid the fine and sent the inspector a wedding photo. The office posted both with permission. The comments were half jokes, half praise for a system that turned shame into better math. Under the glass of Luna, Chen walked the long corridor where the negative capability room stood. She paused at the seam again and smiled at the thought of a future admiral running her fingers there, reading the reasons not to do a thing and adding better ones. She keyed open a different door and entered a workshop where engineers were trying to make rescue foam taste like mint so frightened children would breathe easier. She tasted the latest batch, grimaced, and wrote mint is a mistake. Try vanilla. She added, ask children first. She taped the note where no one could miss it. On Nexus Prime, Alina ended the day where she had begun the work long ago, at the bronze rail she had installed in the human embassy's atrium, now lengthened to include names from other species who had died helping strangers. She ran her fingers along unfamiliar syllables until they felt like family. We built this with our dead, she whispered, so our living would not practice death as a craft. Children ran past, chasing a drone that projected fireflies. The lights flickered across the rail and then across Alina's smile. Outside, the framework's beacon network pulsed a calm, habitual blue, the color of nothing urgent, the color of homework done, the color of a world with enough institutional gravity to keep promises from floating away. The galaxy did not fall silent anymore. It conversed. Ships argued with signals and then adjusted their courses. Markets haggled without looting. Academies graded restraint. Somewhere a wind chime rang, exactly in tune with a patrol tug's horn, and the harmony made a memory in a person who would one day decide whether to flip a switch. We kept the future by telling it the names. And when the day came that someone forgot, the rails would be there, warm, waiting to teach the lesson again.